When I buried my son, I thought I had buried every chance of holding his child. But months later, a knock on my door shattered that belief and dragged me into a storm of grief, hope, and questions I never thought I'd face. That is how my story begins. My son was my pride, my joy, my reason to smile every morning. He was not perfect, but he was mine. He was the kind of boy who lit up a room just by walking into it. His laughter was loud, his heart was kind, and his dreams were bigger than the world we lived in. And then, in one night, it was all taken from me. The phone call that changed everything came in the middle of the night. The kind of call that every parent fears. An accident, they said. My son was gone. Just like that, in one breath, the world told me that my child would never come home again. The days that followed were a blur of tears, arrangements, and a silence in the house that felt heavier than stone. Friends and family came with food, hugs, and kind words, but nothing could fix the hole in my chest. Every corner of the house whispered his name. Every picture frame was a knife to the heart. When you bury your child, you bury a piece of yourself with them. That is the truth no one tells you. Months passed, but the pain stayed. People told me to move on. But how do you move on when your own flesh and blood is gone? And then she came. My son's girlfriend showed up one morning. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying. But in her arms, she carried something that made my breath stop. A baby. The baby was tiny, wrapped in a blue blanket, his little fists waving in the air as if demanding the world to notice him. She looked at me and said, This is your grandson. I froze. The words hit me like thunder. My grandson? My son's child? Was it possible? A flood of emotions hit me at once. Shock, hope, fear, even a strange kind of joy. Could this child really be a part of my son? A piece of him left behind for me to love? But before I could even take it all in, the doubts came rushing too. What if it wasn't true? What if the child wasn't my son's? What if this was just another cruel twist of fate? I wanted to hold that baby. I wanted to believe, but my heart had already been broken once. Could I survive another break? That is when the letter came. A legal notice. It said I was ordered to do a DNA test. My heart sank again. The court wanted proof. Proof that this little baby was indeed connected to my son. At first, I was angry. Angry that anyone could think I would lie. Angry that my grief was being dragged through legal papers. But then I realized it was not about me. It was about the child. The DNA test would tell the truth. If the baby was my son's, then he would have a right to benefits, to recognition, to the truth of where he came from. Still, fear lived inside me. Another question kept screaming inside my head. If the test says yes, does that mean I have to pay child support? I was confused. I was scared. I was grieving. And now, I was standing at the edge of a truth I wasn't ready to face. The day I got that legal notice, my hands were shaking. I had never been to court before. I had never faced lawyers, judges, or papers filled with rules I did not understand. I was just a parent who had lost a child. And now, the world was asking me to prove if another child was really connected to us. I sat at my kitchen table, holding that letter, staring at it like it was written in fire. My mind kept going back to the tiny baby I had seen in her arms. His little fingers, his soft breathing. Was he mine? Was he my blood? Was he my son's child? But there was another fear crawling in the back of my head. Money. Child support. I had heard stories, whispers from neighbors and friends. If a baby is left without a father, the family might have to pay. And I was already drowning in bills, try to survive each month. The thought of being forced to carry that weight broke me. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my son's face. Then I saw the baby's. And then I heard my own thoughts whispering. What if it's true? What if he really is my grandson? Days later, I met with a lawyer. I needed answers. I walked into his office with my heart pounding in my chest. He was a calm man, older, with kind eyes. I told him everything. My son, his death, the girlfriend, the baby, and now this court order. He listened quietly, and when I was done, he leaned forward and said, You are not legally responsible for child support. That is the law. Only parents are. You're the grandparent. No court will ever make you pay. I felt a wave of relief. My shoulders dropped. My chest loosened. But still, he continued, the test is only to know the truth. If the child is your son's, then he will have access to benefits, like Social Security, insurance, maybe even survivor's aid. It is not a punishment. It is recognition. I left his office with mixed emotions. On one hand, I was safe. The court would not make me pay money. But on the other hand, I was still facing the truth. The DNA test would decide if the baby was my blood. And a strange thing started happening inside me. The more I thought about the baby, the more I wanted it to be true. I wanted him to be my grandson. Because if he was, then maybe I had not lost everything. Maybe I still had a piece of my son left in this world. The next time the girlfriend came over, she placed the baby in my arms. My hands trembled as I held him. His eyes were closed, his tiny mouth making soft sounds. And in that moment, I felt something I had not felt in months, hope. But hope can be dangerous. It can lift you up only to throw you down again. I whispered to her, Are you sure? Are you sure he's my son's child? Tears filled her eyes. She nodded. Yes. I know in my heart. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to scream, yes, this is my grandson. This is my blood. But my mind kept pulling me back to the court, to the test, to the waiting. When the day of the DNA test came, I walked into the clinic like a man walking into battle. The smell of medicine filled the air, the walls were cold, and everything felt sharp and empty. The nurse asked me to sit, took a small swab, and gently rubbed it inside my cheek. Just like that, it was over. But the waiting, that was the hardest part. Days felt like months. Every ring of the phone, every letter in the mail made my heart stop. Was this it? Was this the truth finally coming to me? At night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, whispering prayers into the dark. Please, let it be mine. Please, let my son's blood run in his veins. Please, don't take away this last chance. The test result would soon decide everything. The envelope came on a quiet morning. I remember the way it slid through the mail slot, hitting the floor with a sound sound that felt louder than thunder. I knew what it was before I even touched it. The DNA test results. For a long time, I just stood there, staring at it. My hands wouldn't move. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear in my ears. That thin piece of paper carried the power to change everything. Finally, with trembling fingers, I picked it up. I sat at the table where my son used to sit for breakfast. My hands shook as I tore it open. My eyes scanned the words. And then I saw it, clear as day. 99.9% probability. The baby was my son's child. My grandson. I don't remember if I laughed or cried first. Maybe I did both. Tears poured down my face, but they weren't only tears of grief anymore. They were tears of something else. Something like relief, something like joy, something like life finding a way through death. I looked at the picture of my son hanging on the wall and whispered, "You live on. You left me a piece of you." From that day forward, I started to visit the baby more. I held him, sang to him, rocked him to sleep. And every time I looked into his little face, I saw flashes of my son. The same nose, the same tiny ears, even the same way his fists curled. The girlfriend and I began to talk more. We were both broken in different ways, but now we were tied together forever by this child. She told me stories of how my son had planned to be a father, how excited he was when he found out. I listened with tears in my eyes, wishing he was still here to see it. The court process ended quietly. The lawyer was right. I was never asked for child support. The state only needed proof, and once they had it, the case was closed. But for me, it was not about papers or laws anymore. It was about love. I started to see the baby as more than a question mark. He was an answer. He was the answer to my prayers in the dark nights. He was the answer to the ache in my heart. He was the proof that my son's life had meaning beyond the years he lived. And as months turned into years, I watched my grandson grow. His first smile, his first steps, his first word, each one felt like a gift. Each one reminded me that though death had stolen my son, life had given me another chance to love. Sometimes people ask me if it was hard to accept everything. The grief, the shock, the fear of responsibility. And I tell them this. Yes, it was hard. Harder than I can ever explain. But when I look at my grandson, I don't see hardship. I see hope. I see my son living again in the small details of a little boy's life. I see the chance to give love, to protect, to guide, just as I once guided his father. In the end, the DNA test was not about money or courts or papers. It was about truth. And the truth gave me something I thought I had lost forever. It gave me family. So now, when I hold my grandson in my arms, I whisper to him the same words I whispered to his father when he was a baby. You are my heart. You're my blood. And you're my future. Because even though I bury my son, I didn't bury my love. It still lives on in the tiny hands and bright eyes of a child who carries his name, his blood, and his spirit. And that is the story of how grief almost broke me, but love saved me.